Dag iedereen, welkom op een nieuwe Mechanicast. Ik kan het in Engels doen en ik heb hulp van Nout en Tony. Dat is vooral omdat we iemand, I'm gonna say it in English because we've got somebody here, a very special guest. And I'm too nervous to do it all by myself. And you guys, you mainly do the interviews.
We'll just share the nervousness.
Thank you.
It's fine.
You mainly do the interviews on the biggest Comic-Con here in Belgium, in fact. So that's why I asked you to be part of this. But we're all here, and I've got one small audience. That's Michael. He's the biggest fan of Kelly. We've got Kelley Jones here. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, how are you guys doing? This is great.
I'm very fine. First and for all, you're in Belgium, but how did you get here? Did you do
with an airplane?
Yeah. That's not what I was actually trying to get to. But you did a tour in Europe or
yes,
something?
I've been doing a signing tour, some shows in Italy and stores there and here. It's been, I always like doing stores because you can meet people personally and talk to them and they can ask you all kinds of questions. So it has been a lot of fun.
Did you go to Lake Como?
Yes, I've been to Lake Como. I was at the Etna Comics show and then one in Luciano and both in Tierney and in Genova as well.
Okay. Usually you do signing tours when you have a new book out?
I have a lot of stuff coming.
Yeah, you sort of anticipated.
I have a lot of stuff coming, and I have some nice stuff coming out from DC. And
do you have to remain vague about it?
The DC stuff, the DC stuff is they are doing a hardcover of a series I did called Gotham After Midnight, and so. The thing that's kind of special about that is I had drawn, pencil and inked, a one-shot for Batman that was a horror story about 10, 12 years ago that they just couldn't find a place to put it in because of other stuff, so they're going to put that in there. So that's a new story. And lots of extras, lots of the extra stuff I had done. So that'll be a nice addition. The other thing I have to be vague about, which I don't want to be vague about, but they tell you have to be vague. But I can speak on it. It's
Is this the?
It's written by Matt Wagner.
Yeah.
And it's the first of 4 graphic novels. The first one is completely done, colored, lettered. It's just waiting now for publication. They'll make the announcement here fairly soon. And what I liked about it is Matt wrote, there are 4 graphic novels, but they're separate. So if you read number 3, you don't need to read 1, 2, or 4. If you read number 2, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're all standalone stories telling a larger, broader story.
And you'll be doing the art for all
I've
of
done
them?
all the art. And when this is done, I'll show it to you. But
this is done.
This is about 100 pages. The next one's about 120. I think.
And you've done all 4 already?
I've done the first one. I'm halfway through the second.
Oh, okay.
And
it is Matt Wagner and I, and it is.
And is this something original? Or
Yes,
is it like
yes.
Okay.
It is original. As soon as I say it, I can say it.
Sure.
It leans toward. It is horror, but it is one of the best things I have been able to work on because of how well Matt's a great writer, and I always tell him it's like pulp, literary pulp. It's very, very well done, but it's very exploitive at the same time. I mean, that's comics though.
Yeah, sure.
And it's pure comics.
Are you and Matt kind of contemporaries?
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like
Yeah,
you
we've
both
known-
got your start.
Yes, we've known each other
early
for over
80s.
30 years, and we always wanted to work with each other. When we first met, it was 1990 or so, and we instantly hit it off. And of course, he had his great career, and I was doing what I was doing. So every time we wanted to, he would be busy, or I would be committed, or something like that. And finally, a few years ago, he had posted this thing about something he had done or drawn, and I had written in there. I just sent him a note saying, this should have been me. You know, should have been me doing it, and we need to do something. So he got a hold of me. He says, "Are you serious?" I said, "Yes." And so he says, "Okay, I have something in mind. Let me send you an outline, see what you think." And I read it, and I thought it was brilliant. And when he sent me the first script, I had to read it 3 or 4 times to realize, just to believe that it was really
This is something
mine.
for you.
Yes,
that you
because
were
it was
gonna be
so
able to draw
good.
this, yeah.
It was so good, and at that point, I just threw myself in 100%. Initially, we wanted to go through regular publishers, but as we did it more, we realized no, they're not gonna. There's no way.
Okay.
And we wanted it to remain pure. Certainly, I did from Matt's point of view. I didn't want Matt to change a thing that he had done.
Mhm.
And the scope of the story necessitated it. So at that point, he says, "Okay, you know, if you're, I'm committed to. I would like it to be in its pure state."
Yeah.
It's probably more difficult now because there seems to be a lot more controls on things. So if you go the route we're going in, you can just be free and just tell a story.
I mean, it is interesting comparing yours and Matt's careers, because
Mhm.
Matt's always very much been on the side of doing his own,
Yep.
creator-owned
Yep.
things. And I was wondering, doing research for this interview, going back to like that period of the late 80s, early 90s, you had such success with Sandman and Red Rain, because I've heard you talk about like there were signings for these books and there were like huge amounts of people
Yeah.
showing up.
Yeah.
And this was at the same time that sort of like more people were branching out and doing their own creator-owned things.
Right.
Were you ever inclined to sort of say like, I'm moving away from IT, I want
Well,
to do sort of my own thing?
What DC did that was good was they let me act like I was creating it anyway.
Mhm.
They didn't mind me revamping Deadman. I didn't ask them to because I figured if you ask, they may say no. And it's better to say I'm sorry than please. So I did it thinking, well, if they say no, they say no, and there's no harm done. But I will. This is how I feel. This is how I think. And this is how I see it. And thankfully they accepted that. So when I went to but the Sandman after that, I kind of did the same thing. I just drew it the way and everyone, Neil, Karen Berger, and the rest, all loved it. They said, you know, in fact, they had offered it to me as a regular title, but Batman came after Sandman, and that's the top.
And that was Red Rain, right?
Yeah, that was Red Rain, and
that was also because, as you said, people were branching out, but Matt Wagner was at the same time doing Sandman Mystery Theater. DC, I think, was at that point the kind of creative place where there was much more room for a diverse stable of voices and ideas. You know, you had Batman Red Rain, which was just there because they had Elseworlds anyway. And then you had Sandman Mystery Theater, which was a series about the 40s, about the interbellum even. Something that I think wouldn't even last half an issue now.
No, I think what happened, where it was a great time. See, I grew up reading Marvel comics almost exclusively. So I always thought I was a Marvel guy because I'd read all the stuff in the 60s and 70s. I never knew that truly I was a DC guy. And that was to your point of they allowed for really anything to happen. Comics has a metric that I like. If you turn it in on time, they reward you. And in those days, you didn't get away with just drawing 2 issues or 3 issues of something and then you're done. You had to really produce. And if you could do that, they gave you a wide open field to play in. And you could invent your own. And so when I did Deadman, and I expected something bad to happen, I had turned in like 30 or 40 pages. They hadn't seen it. They kept saying, when are you going to turn something in? Don't you want to get paid? And I was afraid to turn it in because I thought if they see 10 pages of this, they're going to say no.
But those were the prestige formats or the backups?
That was the
Detective Comics
yes,
backups.
that was the early ones I did for Action Comics.
Action Comics.
Right, Action Comics. And who cared about Action Comics, right? So I figured on the next one, they're going to care. right? Because that's where they're okay. I didn't realize they didn't care either. Their thing was to keep the copyright of the character, so you had to publish something. That's the rules in America. Is you have to put something out. So I would not turn, and it was a new editor, so I just wouldn't turn anything in. And in fact, finally, he just called and he says, don't you want to be paid? Don't you, And I said, okay, I'm about 8 pages from being done with the first one, at least in pencils. I'll send it in and see I'll just wait. And they were extremely pleased because I think they were bored with the character at that point, and they didn't feel anything was really moving with it.
And even back then, you really went hard on, let's say, your style.
Yeah.
In an era where, especially like main DC had a more than Marvel at the time, I think, had a house style.
Yes, they did.
That you definitely didn't
they
fit
did.
into.
Yes, they did. But you got to remember, all my influences were guys, whether they be comics or film or whatever, were outside of that and transgressive in a way. So what I wanted to do was do something that made me first happy. I figured if I could make myself happy, not come in and arrogantly say I know better than you, but to make myself really happy. Because at Marvel, when I would do that, they would say, this is great, and then they'd hire an inker and they'd change everything.
Yeah.
And I would look at the pencils and I would look at the results and I go, they have to see the difference. So when I got to DC and did Deadman and changed all this stuff, people thought, you got really good overnight. And I go,
it's always been there.
Yeah, and I said, no, they never let it out because there was a house look. And if they saw something deviate, for me the deviation was I did a lot of lighting.
Yeah.
Okay, and I remember them not being able to understand that. And when I went to DC, they didn't say so much anything about the lighting, and they didn't say so much about all of the really heavy exaggeration I would do. I had learned from Marvel how to do a comic, and then I had to unlearn from Marvel how to do a comic, and that was get rid of the rules and start doing something that spoke emotionally to a reader. And the only way that happens is you first have to be emotional yourself. So that emotion has to be put on the paper or it doesn't work. And
so you like being scared?
I hate it. I hate being scared. But I'm the guy who has to look.
Yeah.
You know?
How does that kind of stuff translate in your collaborations with like John Beatty, and I think on the colorist on Red Rain was Les Dorshite.
Yeah.
Greg Wright on Batman.
Yeah.
So is there like a lot of back and forth between you guys? Because like you said, the lighting and stuff.
Yeah. What I always do is I look at if I'm working with an inker, I look at their work and I tell them, do not try to be like me. Be yourself, and then you get a third artist comes out of it. So I would look at John's work, and he was highly graphic, and he had no fear of heavy black areas, big shadows and stuff, but he had a different way of rendering. So I tried to work with that, so he didn't have to. If you have to imitate something or try to be outside of yourself, you're not going to do your best work. If you collaborate in that sense, you can, and then you come up with something different. And frankly, I wasn't so concerned with artistic style as much as with myself as ideas. And I know the ideas drive everything. If you can get great ideas, people will forgive you any other mistakes or missteps or whatever because the idea will hold them. With Deadman, it was making him look physically dead. Yeah. And then I realized to make him look even more creepy, I had to add ribs and I had to add things. And you go
decomposition.
Yes, and if I'm going to follow true anatomy, it's not going to work nearly as well as if you exaggerate and you go more stylized. Yeah. With Batman,
well, you did that. You did a lot of exaggeration.
Yeah, because it's comics, and I can do it there. And so I had thought with Batman, what am I going to bring new to it? I'm not the draftsman of Neil Adams, and I'm not or any of those guys. I can't do that. And my favorite Batman artist was Marshall Rogers, who was a brilliant architectural genius. So I thought, what I can do though is not think of it as what if I were Batman. I thought of it as what if I were being chased by Batman. And chased by Batman, ideas just started to flow. I'm not going to look at all the details on him and all the whatever. He's a shape. And he doesn't come in the day, he comes in the night. And he doesn't really talk too much. So everything is going to be through his gesture, through his body language. The cape had to be alive. The ears I made longer because he's a silhouette to somebody. If he's about fear, it has to be that, not just beating up somebody. Because anyone can do that. So that idea created more and built more. It's why I started making Gotham more of a European-looking city than an American city, because I needed the nooks and the crannies and the alleyways and all that kind of stuff. It worked, and I thought, well, DC may not like this because it's not Manhattan, which Gotham is supposed to be kind of Manhattan. No one had a problem because they got emotionally, it hit them. I remember Denny O'Neil saying that it felt more like Batman than anything he'd seen in many years, and so they just leave you alone. They didn't steer me too much.
I kind of want to go back a bit to like, how do you hone in on that emotion? Because as an artist, there's so much training you have to do. There's so many technical aspects that you have to sort of employ to reach something. Because for me, honestly, one of the images that is seared into my brain is the cover for Batman 496, and it's one of the less well-known covers, but it's a cover where Batman is holding the Joker, and the Joker's done something to his face because his face is covered in warts, and Robin is sort of looking at this and shrieking in the background. And I saw this as a little kid, and the power behind the image was sort of like, this is so emotional. I'm not used to seeing Batman be this intense, because I got to know Batman through the animated series, so that's something that stuck with me. And I'm just wondering how the execution of the ideas and getting to that emotion.
Well, a lot of it isn't trying to do anything other than affect yourself. If I feel it, then I have to hope that others will feel it. I'm not trying to change something, but I did go to it acting like I invented this. That's the only way you can really do these things, is you have to come to it, though it's been around for, at that time, many, many decades. I had to approach this like, well, what if I invented this? And being a comic book fan first, how would I react to seeing these things? So you step back a little bit. But to be honest with you, I wasn't trained artistically in a formal academic setting. I studied film. So I came from a film background, and I took those classes never wanting to make a film. I took them to learn how to tell a story cinematically. But I wanted my own look, and I wanted my own ideas. And I had felt if I'm taught academically all these rules, I'm going to have a hard time getting those out of my head. And if I'm taught film, which isn't teaching me how to draw, I have to solve all my problems. I have to figure this out. So when I would see a film and an image that would get to me, I would apply a more cinematic approach. Even to smaller panels. I didn't want to ever waste a shot of Batman in the book. I figured anytime you see him, he's got to be like wound pretty tight and in character every time. He just doesn't stand there and say, I'm going to have a cup of coffee now and relax. He doesn't do that. He's since he has no superpowers or anything like that, he can't relax.
No. He has to kayfabe through everything.
He's got to stay the way he is.
Yeah.
So I always kept him that way. And I used to tell Doug Minch, who was the writer, don't have him doing anything boring because I'm not going to draw it boring. Don't start the story without him on the page. Because I've got 22 pages to create this atmosphere. And atmosphere only comes from emotion. And so everything is always geared towards that. Nothing academic. Nothing like, well, this is the proper way to do it. Sometimes I would intentionally make something ambiguous to slow the reader down and say, what is this panel? This doesn't make sense. And then they'd stop. And then it only works if what you do works. So I would come up with panels that when they saw it, they would go, oh, that's right. Oh, and then they'd get that ooh moment. Then it would work. And then you have a style. And it's all ideas. if I taught art, they would hate it because I would say, you don't need any pencils or paper or anything. We're going to just work on developing your ideas.
Yeah.
And that's where you're the rest will take care of itself. But if you're going to be an artist, it's not on paper that you're an artist. You walk around like that. And then you do it. I reserve really drawing only in my studio. I don't draw out in the world. I don't bring any stuff. I never do. I don't even think about it. I just go and absorb. And my wife will know when I'm having a good day by not how much art did I produce, but the idea came. And sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and she goes, and there I go, and I have to write it down because it'll go away.
Is that the reason you think why you're such a prolific cover artist?
Yeah.
Because covers.
The drawing's easy.
Yeah.
The drawing is like a snap.
But even those ideas, you write them down. You don't.
Sometimes
you
I
don't-
do.
yeah.
Other times, like with Batman's cape, it came from a mistake. I was drawing it and I wasn't getting it and I was overthinking it, and I sketched out something. I normally don't do that. I just draw, and I sketched it out. It went away. It came back, and I could see the lines that were the erased and mistakes. And this cape came in. It wasn't drawn that way. It looked that way. And then I thought, how am I going to do this? So I went to a department store and bought a black satin sheet. And this is the only thing I could think of. And I got it wet, and I just went in my backyard and threw it over some chairs, and it made all the folds. And the shine, and there it was. And it was, because I was wondering, how do I do this? How do I do this differently? I don't want to do, and then it came to my mind, the only thing too is it's got to be a lot bigger than him. And
bigger
and bigger and bigger and his fingers became talons, and it just all came because he's a predator. And it's, to me, it was gothic film noir.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people say horror.
Did you ask for more cape shots?
No,
Writers and
no,
stuff, or did you just add
no.
those?
What happened?
No, I asked this because I was reading Red Rain again. There's this like one panel where Batman goes into the sewer, and he's in the sewer, but the cape is sort of, it's wet and it's dripping behind me.
Yep.
It's still out of the manhole. It's
Right.
such a striking little image, and I'm like, is that in the script,
Because
or is that something
because
that
wouldn't
you?
that be creepy? You're walking along and you see
Yeah,
that going down.
yeah,
Okay, and that's how I would think. I go, what if I saw it? And you go,
But
it's him.
it's the way you said that you're drawing yourself looking at Batman.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
always
that
me
that
looking
explains the
Yep.
incredible cape and the talons and the gigantic
It's
ears.
why I have
it's shadows.
Yes,
It's
and-
not. Yeah.
Well, it's why I have other artists say that they're influenced, but they can't do it because it's not a technical thing, and it's not like, oh, I have some great skill and they can't imitate. It's not that. It's an idea thing, and that's even harder. You know, when something like that happens, I can't compete with guys who are technically really if that's the game, because I didn't take those courses and I wasn't interested. I didn't want my work to be like school, and I didn't want points for, oh, he's a good storyteller that way. I didn't want that because, okay, no one cares. When you're reading something, you don't care. You want excitement, and you want, ooh, oh, I can't forget that, or I got to go back and look, because that's what happened to me. I would change my mind on artists that I wouldn't like at first, but their imagery was so good, and then I go back and look and I go, wow, they're my favorite. That's what I want, you know. And so when I would talk to people about, they would say, where does this come from? And I would go, it comes from the fact that ideas breed ideas. One idea with the cape made all of Gotham happen because it just starts breeding. Deadman, I couldn't compete with Neil Adams, and it just hit me, he's a dead man. It wasn't just his name. I took his name literally then. And I thought, that's starting to draw itself. And then it was so different that I didn't have to worry about being compared to Neil Adams. And when Neil saw it, he went, you solved the problem of me. But it's completely
Yeah,
different.
because Neil Adams is always Neil Adams.
Yes, and to be
Deadman by Neil Adams.
Yes, and if there's a great thing in my career is that both the characters I made my name on was Batman and Deadman, which are his, right, definitively his. And he had told me in both cases he had felt what I had done was every bit as interesting and good as what he had done. And and the only way that happens is your idea. So I always tell artists, don't compete at that level. Come up with something that's totally from yourself, and your style will develop from it. Break rules to get to that end. Don't feel like, I would love this shot, but it's not going to work. I quit worrying about perspective and started dealing with foreground, midground, background to get depth in a comic, because a comic book print's pretty small. And yes, you can do that and achieve the result, but it doesn't have the same effect of just lines receding into the background as light and shadow doing it. Then it just explodes. I'm not saying don't learn it. I'm just saying don't be a prisoner to just this one. David Lynch says it really well in that if you feel you're stopped by something, that's when you have to just say, just do whatever and don't worry about that rule and see what you get. And that's where imagery comes from. I found later on, when I would do this stuff, when I would hear someone like Lynch or Kubrick say these things, I started to understand it then, because that's what they did. They went, realistically. What is it? Stanley Kubrick says, this great thing about realism is great, but interesting is better. And that is two different things. Interesting it can be realistic, but it doesn't have to be either.
You feel like the time constraints and the deadlines you're able to use.
No, they're wonderful.
Wonderful.
I love deadlines and time constraints. I love.
Does that force you to be more creative, or
it takes away? Fear is the best thing to make great art.
Yeah.
But I just saw Rubens over here with this thing, and I'm quite certain they said it's due. And I think those days they used to burn people, right? So I went. That artist knew it's due.
But on the other hand, isn't it actually dangerous that because you've developed your own style, everybody knows you because of that, and that you have a deadline, that you don't challenge yourself and that it gets too easy?
No, I think what happens is, again, I'm not playing by that rule. I'm playing by ideas. So once I have the idea, then the excitement is to get it on paper. I get bored really quick. So I don't understand an artist who takes 2 months to draw a 5-page. I just don't understand that. I would lose my mind. My thing is, if it can't be put down that day, then I don't want to be an illustrator. I want to be a comic book artist. And there are great illustrators who do comics, but they're not comic book artists. And a comic book artist is a guy who gets it at least one done a day and can get 22 pages and a cover out a month. When you do that, good stuff starts to happen to your style. One, you don't get constrained by stuff that slows you. You just go, I can draw. It's in my head. It's just putting it on paper. So the real art of drawing isn't the technical, it's the mental. It always is. I'm more convinced of that now than ever. So if I was to be an illustrator, then I would have to rethink everything. And that would slow me down, and I think the ideas wouldn't come. I think I would overthink it.
I do feel like in today's, at least mainstream comics, the expectations on the part of the readership are there. They do sort of want that very detailed cinematic look.
Well, if that's all they get.
Yeah.
Now, I put a lot of detail in, and I do a lot of that, but what I find is the kinetic energy of a monthly book, when I was doing Batman, you start to go in different directions you didn't know, and since we organized it in a way that it wasn't, it was like 1 issue or 2 issue stories with connecting subplots, the organic nature of that made it very exciting for a reader. You didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen. And it grows from there. You can start the beginning of any run saying, this is what we're going to do. But if you do it right, by the 6th issue, you go, I don't know what we're going to do. And you just keep, because you're creating so much. And then the ideas come and you go, well, that idea we had 6 months ago is fine, but it's not nearly as good when it grew out of our collaborations. Comics are collaborations too, so you work with your writer and you talk to them. You work with your inker and you talk to them. I wouldn't want to ink myself on monthly work because the excitement of it. I can do that and I have done it, but when you're working with someone else, you hand it off to them and see what they're going to do. And it comes back to you. It's a wonder. And that's comic books. That's its core, what it is. It isn't spending months just drawing a few issues. It isn't just a guy saying it's only me. It's that. And everything we love, everything that this whole industry was built on was on that philosophy. They didn't say it. They just did it. There's nothing wrong with saying, I have to pay my mortgage and get this book out. If you add the workmanlike attitude to fine art, you get great stuff. And I always tell people when they say, well, you can't really say that, I go, well, at the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo was a commercial artist. And he didn't write about, oh, the muse spoke to me. He says, the damn Pope won't pay me my money on time. So I can't afford the scaffold to get to the next thing because they're holding out on me. He didn't write. But when you look at it, you wouldn't know it. And he had a deadline. You know, he was yelled at pretty good. And I always say the greatest commercial artist, illustrator, comic book artist would have been Michelangelo.
Well, it is interesting because there's this example that makes the round on social media. I think it's this tweet by Jesse Ham, the late Jesse Ham. And it's like, this is the reason why so many comic book artists can't stick to a monthly schedule anymore. It's a picture, I think, of like Captain America's boot, drawn by Jack Kirby. Yeah. And it's a boot, but it's simple. It's simple line work, and then it's like Brian Hitch drawing Captain America's boot.
I have no problem. The whistling shoe. Yeah, but you got to say what you look at is the people like Kirby or Ditko, whatever. Look what they did.
Yeah, I mean,
and then at that point you go, that's the way. They point the way. Illustrative is different, and fine if you want to do that, but don't. The industry's mistake was focusing on that as the importance, not the story and the energy and the emotion. I used to have guys come up to me and say, "Well, the Batman you're doing, how other artists would say, how do you do his body? How do you draw and then put the cape on?" I said, I just think of the shape of the cape. I don't even care how the rest works. Who cares? What are we doing? I spend 7 months to getting that all right, and then it's not going to matter, and it's not going to look as good, right? We will not come anywhere close to as good as the impression of this, and that's what comics are in that sense. They're very impressionist. Kirby is extremely impressionistic. I mean, he just gives you the idea of what this body will do, or that, and the rest you do. That's why he could get so much done. I'm telling you right now, when he sat down and worked, no matter what, the energy level is there. I'm not talking about action scenes, just the energy level's there. Bernie Wrightson, it's the same way. There's an energy there. And when you look at it, you just go, this guy loved what he was doing, and he was productive. So there's no points for low productivity. Yeah. That's not comics. Real comics is a guy... I had it explained to me, it's not how good you are on the first issue of a run you do, it's how good you are on the 12th issue. That's the measure of an artist in comics. And that was said to me by Doug Wildey, who had invented Johnny Quest and all that stuff. And that's what made me want to do monthly, was a challenge to yourself. And he says, you'll be a better artist after that, and you won't be afraid of a deadline. You won't be afraid of... that day's blank page, because you won't have time. And fear is good. The majority of covers I did for Batman during Knightfall, I would be called on a Monday that it was due on a Wednesday, and that was in FedEx Day, so you couldn't scan it and send it at the last second. So that meant if I was told Monday, which happened, and we're not really sure what we want, Kelly, but Batman is with this, and can you, okay, and I went, all right. So that meant I had to pencil and ink it and have it on their desk Wednesday. So that meant I had till where I lived on the West Coast. I was in California and they're in New York then. That meant I had till 3 o'clock Tuesday to get it to them. So I had a day. And you just sit down and you go, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And fear and terror makes you go, well, I'll make it more... The only thing you do is rely on yourself. And they worked. They began to work so well, that's why they kept me on. Because they said, boy, every time we ask him, we're getting something that works, that is becoming iconic. I wasn't thinking that, but they were. because I kept thinking, well, this month they won't ask me. I'll be done. I can go back, and I would stupidly go back to what I was doing, and then I get that call. Like, we really need.
Were
this.
you doing other work
Oh
at
yeah,
the
I was
same
doing my
time?
own stuff. I was doing when I was doing those. I was drawing Alien.
Right.
I was doing my vampire books. I was doing my own thing. So I had nothing to do with what. In fact, I had no idea what was going on with Knightfall. They didn't know either. They had an outline, but they were. But that's the beauty of Knightfall. It was very organic. You had 3 great writers, Dixon, Grant, and Mensch, and they all were veterans, and they all knew how to produce. And then all the artists were the same way. Couldn't do it now. Could not happen now. There's no way, because those guys all could commit to doing 2 years on a book. And you got them every month.
That was the time when writers would go decades on a book.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked because they didn't base it on one idea, they based it on the character. So when you'd read Batman, no matter who he was up against, no matter what the issue, the situation was, the character was so well done. And that's Denny O'Neil, who used to say, you can do whatever you want, but here's kind of, Batman's got to be this certain way, but do whatever you want with it. He had no rules for artists. If you captured his imagination, that's why he had so many different looks under him. If you captured his imagination, you were fine.
Were there ever any instances where you did kind of butt up against something that was like, oh, this, we can take
The only
this
thing I
for-
had to change, this is silly sounding, the only thing I ever had to change in all of the years I was with Denny was I had Bruce Wayne eating a jelly donut, and he wanted it a cream donut because he said a jelly donut he wouldn't have because there's too much sugar in it or something. I went, well, a cream donut, right? Cream, but that was something he was like, Kelly can. So I removed it from a dark filling to just erased it out. And that was that. But and his famous dictum of no traffic jams in Gotham. He can just get around anytime he needs to. We're not going to have him sit in traffic.
Don't have too much realism.
That part you can't. It's well.
You can't have him stop at a gas station.
He used to tell the writers, "I don't want."
On the Batman situation.
No, he says, "I don't want Bruce Wayne doing his taxes." Okay, so we all know that stuff. People don't come here for that, and that's why his dealings with Batman were great. He would deal with real issues, but he would do it in a fantastical way, and each writer had their own way. Doug used to say a thing like, he just said it in passing. He didn't describe it in the story, so I put it in. He says, how creepy would it be? You're in your apartment, you're on the 23rd floor, you're taking a shower, you're brushing your teeth, and you look out and there's Batman climbing up the side of the wall. That's creepy to me. There's a guy out there. And so I put that in one. So it's just, the panel was originally written, Batman's scaling up the building, did something. So I took that shot and did it from an inside of somebody brushing his teeth. And I got so much good feedback for that. Now that's the kind of realism I like, because it didn't slow anything down and it doesn't change anything. And it's like, that's a weird thing. That's a creepy thing. It's like
adds the atmosphere.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I always felt that Gotham needed to be a character. So I always used to tell him, I'm going to do some strange stuff with Gotham. There was because New York was founded by the Dutch, I figured Gotham was founded by the Dutch, so it made sense there would be an old-timey windmill there as remember the old days. So I would put a windmill in the background, and I always thought they're going to yell at me for this, and they didn't. They one time one of the assistants says, Kelly, there's a windmill in this, right? Is there a reason? And I said that, and he goes, okay, that works, that's cool. And I did that with, I put a steam train in there rather than the modern train. I figured, a steam train.
All of the cars usually
I would round them.
Older,
I figured I'll treat it like Cuba.
Yeah,
sure. The cars are cool and they're old, and I'll put a modern one in here, but they're not as Gotham-y as the rounded ones, And certainly in America, you see those cars around all the time too. The collectors will do big. Like where I live, there's a really neat old hamburger stand, and they'll show up once a month with all these cars, and I just go and take pictures.
Well, Unfortunately, we reached a deadline here.
Jens is getting very nervous.
Yeah, I'm mainly getting nervous because there's lots of people coming into the store, and they're all here for you.
Okay, no, this was a lot of fun. This is
Yeah.
always good to talk about this stuff, and I think it's great people hear the nuts and bolts of this in that sense, that there is, at least for me, it's all about fun. Len Wein's great thing used to be, every time I talked to Len Wein, he'd always end the phone call, so remember, this is fun. Making them, reading them, whatever. Even if the story ends in a terrible tragedy, you had fun.
I do have to ask one more question.
Ask it.
Because like you're one of those people who's had like a career in comics.
The
That's
final question.
No, but it spans like different generations, because you did work with people, you met people like Marshall Rogers,
Yes.
and you worked with people like Dennis O'Neill and Ween, Bernie Wrightson. So I wondered, like, your perspective looking back on the way that the industry was back then, and you've been through it for so many things. So how do you feel about the industry now? Where do you see it going?
Well, what I think is that the industry needs to always, I worked for Danny O'Neill, Archie Goodwin, all these people, but they did it. And they had very good, great careers. So when they would ask you something, they weren't asking you to do superhuman things. They knew because they had to do it. They didn't come to you say things that were impossible or not. They didn't want you to be them. They wanted you to be you. So they push you in that direction. They knew the history and the lore of these things. They knew every aspect of these characters, and they don't do that now. You have people come in and they don't know their history, so they don't respect the lore. They don't know the classic stuff. They're just trying to tap into whatever's going on in pop culture now, rather than realize we have a rich, wonderful legacy, and you build on that and build on that and build on that. I was absolutely opposite probably everything they thought when I came in there, but I adhered to the classic nature of Bruce Wayne and Batman and all that, and I was just bringing, to me, I was influenced by 40s thinking, the 40s. They were fine with that. But now a lot of times you have to explain to them who Bernie Wrightson is, or who Wally Wood is, or that Bruce wouldn't do that because of this. Bruce is not...
And not so much Bruce can't sit, but... Bruce,
right, and see, I always saw it as, it's Bruce. He dresses up, and he does his thing, but I never separated the characters. Neither did Denny, neither did Doug. No one. That was Bruce. It's always Bruce. And he's not crazy, he's not twisted, he's not anything. He just doesn't want what happened to him to happen to others. That's it. And when you work on that basis, everything else can be fresh and new and different and exciting. And comics are suffering right now because they're not acknowledging their past. They don't acknowledge their history, and their future becomes insincere. And you have to be honest with the readers that when you're handling this, you respect it. So when I read something from 1973, it should still echo the same as 2023. It can be brand new. It can be completely different. I have no qualms with that because that's what I did. But my influence in the 90s and the 2000s was 1940s Batman, which creeped me out, But I love them because they're whack. They're exciting. But I know I can't duplicate that. I just do it through my filter.
Yeah, sure.
And then that way it works. And I think all the really great people I knew did that as well. So that's my basic fear, is that when you get away from what makes us all love this, it becomes a different thing.
I guess that's why Red Rain works so well, because the idea of like, what if Batman was a vampire is like a Silver Age idea, but it's played absolutely straight,
totally
with
straight,
sincerity. So.
And it's played with a sincere, authentic view of that character. So when you see it, you can see the struggle is, how does he... Doug's great thing was he would not take the blood of a human, and then until it was the Joker. And that was the corruption, and that's when he brilliantly said the Joker wins, and the Joker did that on purpose. He set it up to where he knew, I'll be the one, even though I win, and he did, and that was genius.
And on that cliffhanger. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Kelly. And gentlemen, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your
This was
professional
great.
questions.
Very,
Pleasure.
very well
Michael,
done, guys.
thank you for being an
Thank you
audience.
so much.
Okay.
En iedereen bedankt om te kijken en te luisteren. En tot de volgende keer. Bye.
Goodbye.